Hello and mabuhay to my friends at the School of Perpetual Help in Iriga City. I'm very pleased to be with you, albeit virtually. I'd prefer to be with you in person, but unfortunately that's not possible because I'm a very long way away here in England. My name is Dr. Tom Sykes. I'm Senior Lecturer in Creative Writing and Journalism at the University of Portsmouth here in the UK. But I'm also a writer and journalist. I've written 2 books about the Philippines, which is why perhaps I'm relevant for a talk like this. My first book, The Realm of the Punisher, was a kind of travelogue of the Philippines. I traveled all around the islands to try and get an understanding of the contemporary political situation in your fine country. And my most recent book is, you can see it just here behind me. Sorry, my head is blocking it somewhat, but it's more of an academic analysis of lots of Western writing about Manila, dating back at least 200 or 300 years. But then also in that book, I look at a number of Filipino writers in English who I'm a huge fan of. And we'll kind of mention some of those a little bit later on. We'll come back to that. The Philippines is a country that I've spent a lot of time in. I love many aspects of your culture and history. I lived in Quezon City for a brief period in 2009 to 10, and I've been traveling back to the Philippines ever since, fairly often. The last time though was in 2018, and I hope to come back again very soon. That would be a dream come true for me. And then perhaps I can visit you in person and come and meet you in the flesh. So I'm very pleased to have been asked to talk a little bit about reading and writing and speaking in this, as part of your National Reading Month celebration, which I think is very important and I fully support. And I'll begin by just saying a few things about why reading is important, but also trying to avoid some of the sort of more obvious and cliched things that people tend to say when they get asked such questions. I think it goes without saying that, of course, reading, getting good at reading and understanding texts and understanding language and how language works is very important for a range of vocations in life. We know that, that's very clear. But I think that actually maybe there might be an even more important application for reading than that even, which is, I think when you start to be able to understand how language works and operates and how it can be used and misused, then it really makes you a more critical person. It improves your ability to think critically about the world. I think it makes you freer, it makes you more autonomous. I think it makes you a better citizen, and in many ways, without sounding too pompous, a better human being. Because I think that, we live in a world of language and words and writing, whether online or offline. And there's a lot of very useful material out there, a lot of very useful messages on the internet, on the streets that we walk around, in books and in magazines and in newspapers and so forth. But there are also lots of people who, and lots of forces in our society that would seek to try to abuse or misuse language, to try and trick us, or to try and seduce us into voting for them or buying something that we may not really need or want to buy, to indoctrinate us into certain bad ideas or bad modes of thought. And I think if you understand how language works, then you are able to navigate through those potential through that sort of potential minefield, as it were. You can think for yourself. You can recognize when a politician or an advertiser or someone in a position of power is trying to manipulate you or trying to con you. I think that's very important. And I think that's particularly important in this day and age where there is a lot of false information and so-called fake news flying around online and off. Again. So I think that's very important. I think the more you read and the more you write, the better you speak, the better you communicate with people. On a one-to-one basis, I think it's more likely that I hope that you will avoid conflict with friends and family members and people you care about and people that you have to rub along with in your day-to-day life. I'm a big believer that, yes, if you can understand language, understand words and the power of words, then this will make your life easier. I hope that's true. Just to say a couple of things about writing, which obviously is very closely connected to reading, is very important to me as someone who is, in addition to being an academic, someone who teaches creative writing. I am also someone who has always written. I write a lot for the national press in the UK about the Philippines, but also about other issues as well. I've done a lot of travel writing in my time as well, foreign correspondence type work. I also write little bits of comedy and satire. I also have written fiction, short stories and various things. There's a wonderful world of literary forms out there, and I'm interested in pretty much all of it. And I hope that you are too, or you will become interested as you go along. Because I say there's a lot of great material out there. And I think something that I've found personally, and this may apply, I hope it may apply to you as well, is that pursuing writing as a career, as a vocation, has made my life much more interesting, because it has taken me to interesting places. It's taken me to the Philippines, for example. It's allowed me to meet intriguing and sometimes eccentric people, many thousands of miles away from where I come from here in England originally. It's allowed me to see extraordinary places of natural beauty and to visit extraordinary cities like the great cities of the Philippines, Manila being the largest of them, and to have encounters with different cultures and different ways of looking at the world, different people with different lifestyles, different values. And all of that, I think, is very healthy to being a human being, to being a good person. I'm a big believer that we should be always challenging ourselves, always confronting and engaging with difference and with people who are not like ourselves, because then that hopefully again makes us more tolerant and more open-minded to the diversity of the world. So writing, yes, compels you, I think, to have a better life. I think it's also there's also been a lot of very interesting research recently into how writing boosts one's well-being. And I'm afraid I don't know what the situation is like in the Philippines. This is not an aspect of the Philippines that I've explored myself, but certainly here in the UK, maybe more broadly what you might call the West, there is an epidemic of mental health problems amongst especially young people. And there are lots of complex reasons for that. And I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to start trying to analyze that problem in that way. But one thing I'm aware of as a writer and as a teacher is that writing and more broadly being creative tends to be quite good for one's well-being, right? And I think a lot of this has to do with self-expression, that often we may become dismayed or depressed because we have kind of confused thoughts in our head. We are confused about what's going on in our lives, and we find it difficult to articulate that, myself included. And once you sit down and write about your feelings and these thoughts, sometimes I think just committing them to the page, structuring them and ordering them in a kind of logical way is very helpful, does set the mind at ease. So I don't pretend to know the mechanics, the psychological mechanics of that, but I do know that this is something that's worked for me, and it's something that there's more and more research into the benefits of writing for well-being. So I think it's important, whether you publish stuff or not, whether you make a career out of it or not, is kind of unimportant from that point of view. What is important is that you're just doing it, that you're doing it for its own sake, that you are writing, you're creating something that wasn't there before. It's a kind of magical act. You're creating an artifact, a story, a poem, an article, a travelogue, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter whether it achieves some, meets some kind of criteria for being publishable. I mean, that's nice if you can achieve that. But actually, the important thing, as I say, is just to the act itself. It is its own reward. And as Oscar Wilde, the great Irish wit and playwright, said, all art is quite useless. And by that, he didn't mean that art was a waste of time. He meant that the virtue of being creative and creating art is that you do it for its own sake, because it is its own reward. And I think also attached to that, I think the reward can be, improved mental health and well-being. I would just say also that in terms of reading, as a writer, if you want to be a writer, you have to read like a writer too, and you have to analyze texts, read them in a non-casual way. You know, the sort of ordinary fan of literature, someone who just likes to take a novel with them on their holidays and read that and enjoy it, read it very quickly and just for its entertainment value, is one kind of reading. But as a writer, you've got to be reading critically. You've got to be, when I read other great writers, or when I read other writers that I admire, I'm on the lookout for certain techniques and tricks that they may be using that might inspire me, that might help me to get better as a writer. So it's very important that as a writer you read other people's work critically and analytically, so that it improves your craft as a writer. That's very important too, I think. I want to mention, I'll just sort of finish off, I think, by mentioning a few Filipino writers that I admire, that if you're not already aware of, I hope you are aware of them, but I would strongly recommend them. One of my favorite novels, perhaps my favorite novel by in the whole canon of Filipino literature in English, is a book called America is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan, which is a very powerful and very poignant roman à clef. In other words, it's a novel which is very much based on the real life experiences of a young man, I think originally from Ilocos region, who emigrated to the United States looking for work, as so many people do, from all over the world. But he arrives in the United States when the Great Depression is beginning in the 1930s. So this is a time of extraordinary economic and social strife. And Bulosan endures extraordinary difficulties in order to, try to pursue the American dream, which so many people are attracted to. And it's a very, very powerful book in all sorts of ways, not least that it was very much ahead of its time. It was published in the 1940s, but it really deals with a lot of issues that I think are very significant and meaningful to people today. Issues around racial prejudice, issues around culture, cultural difference, stereotypes, judgments that are made between cultures, of cultures, by cultures, immigration, questions around imperialism and colonialism, which are still very much with us, despite us being, supposedly in a sort of post-colonial world. Certainly the Philippines is, I don't need to tell you that, about the post-colonial condition, because you're all living through that, right now. And, Bulosan is a very important writer in that way. And I think it's problematic that he's not known. Whenever I mention him to even people who are quite well read here in the UK, they're aware of lots of Indian and Chinese and Russian writers and writers from those parts of the world, but they're not aware so much of Filipino writers in English, which I think is a real pity. And I hope that changes. And I'm trying to, in my own small way as a teacher and as a critic, I'm trying to change that or contribute to changing that, because I teach my kids, my students at the University of Portsmouth, Filipino literature and English. And you know, the reaction is often quite positive. I would also recommend more recent writers. There are lots of great women writers in the Philippines that you should be proud of, and what you might say, you know, women writers who are part of the diaspora or are of Filipino heritage but based in other countries. And a novel, a fairly recent novel that impressed me hugely was is called Insurrecto by Gina Apostol, who you may be aware of, which is again an extraordinary novel, a very different sort of novel to the Bulosan book that I mentioned. It's a very experimental, playful, sort of in many ways sort of complex novel, intellectual, but it deals again with some very important issues around history and memory and culture and cultural difference, and so forth, but in a very, as I say, in a very experimental and creative and innovative way. And I would recommend that. And similarly is a book called Dog Eaters by Jessica Hagedorn, which I suppose is more of a kind of historical novel. I think it focuses on several decades of Philippine history, really from the 1950s or the end of World War II, if I remember rightly, through the Marcos era all the way up to the sort of 1990s, which I think was around about the time the novel was first published. Again, a very, very clever, postmodern, experimental sort of novel, very funny novel as well, very satirical, and it's able to sort of take satirical swipes at both, you know, Western culture and Western attitudes to the Philippines and vice versa, which is interesting, I think. There are many other writers. I won't go into detail now because I don't have time, but I would recommend F. Sionil Jose if you're not aware of him. Another sort of great figure, Nick Joaquin, also, who is very rightly very famous, and I think is often regarded as the sort of you know, the great figure in Philippine literature, and someone who has been taken seriously abroad and published abroad and critically lauded outside of the Philippines, which, as I say, I think should happen more to other Filipino writers and writers of Filipino origin outside of the Philippines. So yes, I think that's about it then, really, from me. I hope that you enjoy all the activities that you're doing as part of this very important month celebrating reading and writing and literature. I think this is a great thing. I wish in the UK we had a month to focusing on that. I think we just have a sort of day. We have a National Book Day, and maybe there's a couple of other days through the year. It's not enough for people who love books and reading and writing. You know, we want to be celebrating that as much as possible and as often as possible. So do have an excellent month. This is the run up to Christmas, so I hope you all have a kind of a nice festive break after that. And as I say, it would be lovely one day to come and visit you in person and meet some of you. I would just like to thank Mr. Ramos for inviting me very kindly. We made friends on Facebook, and we've had some pleasant discussions about you know, writing and journalism in the Philippines, and it would be great, Mr. Ramos, if we could, you know, meet in person one day. I'm planning to try to put a project together which is going to bring together scholars from the UK and the Philippines, and that hopefully will involve traveling to your excellent country in the next year or two. I'm hoping, supposing we don't have more pandemic lockdowns or restrictions, that let's hope that that is behind us. I think the whole world feels the same about that. So thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. I hope that was useful to you. I'll say goodbye and palam and ingat. Excuse my accent. I would know more Tagalog if you guys weren't so damn good at speaking English. This is the problem for foreigners, is when we try and say some Tagalog phrases, we are quickly figured out as being foreigners who can't really speak the language very well, and you guys speak beautiful English, or most of you that I've met, and so there's not such an incentive to learn your excellent language, but I'm working on it. I'm trying. I hope I'll be better by the time I come back. So thank you very much. Salamat. goodbye and take care. Thank you.